The steady hum of the heater filled the room as I sat at the small desk by the window, my pen poised over a sheet of crisp ivory paper. It had been my ritual for years now, writing to my son even though I knew he wouldn't respond. Each letter began the same way, a quiet hope mingling with resignation. Dear Michael. The paper felt cold under my fingertips, much like the winter air seeping through the gaps in the old window pane. Outside, the world was silent, blanketed in snow, but my mind raced with thoughts. Christmas had come and gone, and once again, there had been no word from him. 7 years now, 7 Christmases without his voice, his laughter, or the warm embrace I still remembered so vividly. I hope this letter finds you well, I wrote, though the words felt hollow. I missed you at Christmas, but I understand how busy you must be. Your work is so important, and I'm so proud of everything you've achieved. Still, I can't help but wish we could spend some time together. It's been too long. The pen hovered over the page as my thoughts threatened to spill over into bitterness. I wanted to ask him why he hadn't called, why he hadn't answered my letters or returned my messages. But I stopped myself. Michael had always been ambitious, always chasing something bigger. Perhaps he thought I wouldn't understand his world now, with its grand boardrooms and towering skyscrapers. Perhaps he didn't realize how much his absence hurt. I set the pen down and folded the letter carefully, placing it on the small stack of others I had written over the years. They sat there, unsent, like a quiet memorial to the connection we once had. As I looked at them, a wave of longing washed over me, mingled with the sharp sting of regret. Had I done something wrong? Had I failed him as a mother in some way I couldn't see? The room felt colder, despite the heater's hum. I pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders and turned to the window, watching as snowflakes swirled gently in the fading light. Another year had passed, and my son felt more like a stranger than ever. This time, something inside me refused to let the year end this way. I couldn't keep waiting for him to come to me. If he wouldn't respond to my letters or my calls, then I would have to go to him. I didn't know what I would say or how he would react, but I had to try. I'll visit him, I murmured aloud, the sound of my own voice startling me. The words felt heavy, yet they carried a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Before I could second-guess myself, I began making plans. I would drive to his home before the new year, despite the snow and despite my nerves. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the darkened ceiling, doubts crept in. What if he didn't want to see me? What if I arrived only to be turned away? But beneath the fear was a quiet determination. He was my son. No matter how much time had passed, no matter how distant he seemed, I needed to see him. Morning came slowly, the gray light filtering through the curtains as I prepared for the journey. My hands trembled slightly as I packed a small bag, an extra scarf, a thermos of tea, and the Christmas gift I had intended to give him weeks ago. It was a leather-bound journal, simple, but elegant, the kind of thing he used to love when he was younger. The car engine sputtered to life as I pulled out of the driveway, the snow crunching softly under the tires. My little house grew smaller in the rearview mirror, and with it, the years of waiting and wondering. For the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. The road stretched long and empty ahead of me, blanketed in snow that sparkled faintly under the pale winter sun. The hum of the car engine was the only sound, a steady rhythm that seemed to match the pounding of my heart. I hadn't driven this far in years, and the nerves simmering in my chest made the journey feel even longer. The thermos of tea sat untouched on the passenger seat beside me, along with the neatly wrapped journal. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, the leather cool under my fingertips. As the countryside blurred past, my thoughts drifted to Michael, to the boy I had raised and the man he had become. I remembered how, as a child, he would sit at the kitchen table with a determined expression, scribbling furiously in his notebooks. "I'm going to change the world, Mom," he'd say, his eyes alight with ambition. And he had. From the little I knew, Michael had built an empire, his name synonymous with success. But somewhere along the way, the distance between us had grown, stretching into a silence I could no longer bear. The closer I got to his home, the grander the surroundings became. Modest houses gave way to sprawling estates, their gates adorned with intricate ironwork and their driveways lined with perfectly pruned trees. I couldn't help but feel out of place, my little car a stark contrast to the sleek luxury vehicles I passed. Finally, I saw it, Michael's manor, rising like a palace against the snow-dusted horizon. The gates opened slowly as I approached, the sound of machinery breaking the stillness. My breath caught as I drove through, the long driveway curving gently through manicured gardens. The house itself was massive, its stone facade imposing yet beautiful, with tall windows that reflected the pale light of the sky. I parked near the entrance, my heart pounding as I took in the sheer scale of the place. It was nothing like the cozy home we had shared when he was growing up, with its creaky floorboards and mismatched furniture. This was a different world, one that felt as distant as the 7 years that separated us. A butler appeared as I stepped out of the car, his demeanor impeccable. He wore a crisp black suit, and his expression was polite but unreadable. "Mrs. Evelyn," he said, his voice smooth and professional. "We've been expecting you." "Expecting me?" The words caught me off guard. How could they have known I was coming when I hadn't told anyone? My confusion must have shown on my face, but the butler didn't elaborate. Instead, he gestured toward the grand double doors, which opened as we approached. The house was even more magnificent inside. Marble floors gleamed under towering ceilings, and the air smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh flowers. A chandelier hung above the entrance hall, its crystals casting tiny rainbows on the walls. Everything was immaculate, yet there was something unsettling about it, a stillness that felt unnatural, as though the house was more a display than a home. "This way, please," the butler said, leading me down a wide corridor. My footsteps echoed softly as I followed, my eyes drawn to the ornate details of the space. Paintings hung on the walls, their gilded frames catching the light, and every piece of furniture seemed chosen with precision. We stopped at a sitting room, its fireplace crackling warmly. The butler motioned for me to sit. "Mr. Michael is currently occupied," he said. "He will see you shortly." I nodded, sinking into a plush armchair near the fire. The warmth was welcome, but my unease grew with each passing moment. Why hadn't Michael come to greet me himself? And what did the butler mean by occupied? I glanced around the room, taking in the expensive furnishings and carefully curated decor. Everything was perfect, yet it felt impersonal, as though it belonged to someone else entirely. The butler left, and I was alone with my thoughts. I smoothed the fabric of my skirt, my hands trembling slightly. Had I made a mistake coming here unannounced? Would Michael even be happy to see me? The questions swirled in my mind, each one heavier than the last. I waited for what felt like hours, the silence broken only by the occasional sound of footsteps in the hallway. Staff members passed by the open door, their glances brief but curious. I caught snippets of conversation, but the words were too quiet to make out. As the minutes stretched into hours, my patience began to wane. I had come all this way, through snow and nerves, and still, I had not seen my son. The idea that he might not want to see me gnawed at the edges of my resolve. Finally, the butler returned, his expression as calm as ever. "Mr. Michael will be available to see you shortly," he said. I forced a smile, though my frustration bubbled beneath the surface. "Thank you," I replied. "I'll wait." But as he left the room once more, I felt a surge of restlessness. How much longer would I have to wait? And why did the house feel so strange, so empty despite its grandeur? I couldn't sit still any longer. Rising from the chair, I smoothed my skirt again and glanced toward the door. If Michael wouldn't come to me, then I would find him myself. The fire crackled softly in the sitting room as I stood near the door, my hands trembling slightly. The butler's calm words echoed in my mind, "Mr. Michael will be available to see you shortly." Shortly. How long had it been now? An hour? 2? I glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner, its steady ticking amplifying the heavy silence around me. Time felt stretched, unnatural, as though the house itself resisted my presence. I paced slowly around the room, my footsteps muffled by the plush rug beneath me. My eyes wandered over the carefully arranged furniture, the rich tapestries on the walls, the crystal decanters on the sideboard. Everything was perfect, pristine, but it lacked any sign of life. There were no personal touches, no photographs, no books that looked well read, no signs of Michael's presence. A pang of unease settled in my chest. This house was a far cry from the warm, messy home I had once shared with Michael, where laughter and conversation filled every corner. I tried to shake off the feeling, reminding myself that this was the life he had built, a life of success and sophistication. Yet, something about the stillness felt wrong. I moved toward the fireplace, drawn by the warmth of the flames. Above the mantel hung a large oil painting, its subject an abstract swirl of colors that seemed to shift under the light. I tilted my head, trying to make sense of the image, but it eluded me. Like the house, it was beautiful but uninviting. On a small table near the fireplace, a stack of magazines caught my eye. They were glossy business publications, their covers adorned with bold headlines and sharp suits. One of them featured Michael, his familiar face staring back at me. I picked it up carefully, my fingers brushing the edge of the paper. "The visionary behind the empire," the headline proclaimed. Below it, Michael stood in front of a towering skyscraper, his expression confident and composed. My heart ached as I studied the photo. He looked so polished, so distant, like a man I didn't know. I set the magazine down, my hands trembling slightly. The house felt colder now, the fire's warmth unable to reach me. Staff members moved quietly through the hallways, their footsteps barely audible. Occasionally, one of them would glance into the sitting room, their expressions polite but curious. Their eyes lingered on me as though I were an intruder, someone who didn't belong. The unease grew stronger with each passing moment. I felt like a ghost in this house, invisible and out of place. I tried to tell myself that Michael would come soon, that everything would make sense once I saw him. But the longer I waited, the more restless I became. I began to explore the room, my hands brushing over the smooth surfaces of the furniture. The grand piano in the corner caught my attention, its lid propped open to reveal gleaming keys. I pressed one gently, the note ringing out sharply in the silence. It startled me, and I quickly withdrew my hand. The sound lingered for a moment before fading into the stillness. I moved to the bookshelves next, running my fingers over the spines of leather-bound volumes. They were immaculate, their covers untouched. I pulled one down at random, flipping through the pages. The paper was crisp, the binding stiff. It was clear these books had never been read. After another hour passed, my patience wore thin. The butler had promised Michael would see me shortly, but I couldn't sit here waiting any longer. My heart ached with the need to see him, to speak to him, to understand why he had stayed away for so long. I smoothed my skirt with trembling hands and stepped into the hallway. The house seemed even larger now, its corridors stretching endlessly in both directions. I hesitated for a moment, glancing over my shoulder to see if anyone had noticed me. The hallway was empty, the staff nowhere to be seen. Taking a deep breath, I started walking. Each room I passed was more impressive than the last. The dining room held a table large enough to seat 20, its surface gleaming under a massive chandelier. The chairs were perfectly aligned, untouched. The kitchen, with its state-of-the-art appliances and spotless counters, felt equally unused. It was as though the house had been preserved in a state of perpetual readiness, waiting for someone to bring it to life. I wandered into the library next, its towering shelves filled with books that looked as pristine as those in the sitting room. A ladder leaned against one shelf, its rungs polished and smooth, as though it had never been climbed. The air was thick with the scent of leather and wood polish, but there was no warmth here, only emptiness. As I moved through the house, the staff's glances became more frequent, their expressions harder to read. A maid arranging flowers in the hallway paused as I passed, her eyes following me with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. A housekeeper polishing a brass doorknob quickly looked away when I met her gaze. Their reactions made me feel small, as though I were trespassing in a place I had every right to be. I tried to shake off the discomfort, focusing instead on my search for Michael. Where was he? Why hadn't he come to greet me? My frustration grew with each unanswered question, driving me forward through the endless maze of rooms. Eventually, I found myself at the base of a grand staircase. The marble steps curved gracefully upward, disappearing into the shadows of the upper floor. My heart pounded as I placed a hand on the banister, the smooth wood cool under my touch. I hesitated, glancing around to see if anyone was watching. When no one appeared, I began to climb. The air grew heavier as I ascended, the silence more oppressive. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched before me, its doors spaced evenly along the walls. My footsteps were muffled by the thick carpet as I moved cautiously, peering into each room I passed. Most were guest bedrooms, their beds perfectly made, their surfaces free of dust. As I neared the end of the hallway, I noticed a door that was slightly ajar, a faint light spilling out into the corridor. My breath caught, and a sense of foreboding settled over me. My hands trembled as I reached for the door, pushing it open, slowly. What I saw inside made my knees go weak. The door creaked softly as it swung open, revealing a room bathed in a sterile light. My breath caught as I stepped inside, my hand gripping the doorframe for support. The grandeur of the rest of the house had stopped here. This room was starkly different, its walls lined with medical equipment that beeped softly, their rhythmic sounds breaking the oppressive silence. And there he was, my son, Michael. He lay in the center of the room on a hospital bed, his face pale and drawn, his body frail against the crisp white sheets. Tubes and wires surrounded him, connected to machines that hummed quietly. His chest rose and fell with effort, each breath labored but steady. My heart shattered at the sight, and my knees threatened to give way beneath me. "Michael?" I whispered, my voice trembling. I took a hesitant step forward, my hands shaking as I clutched my scarf. He didn't respond, his eyes closed and his expression slack, as though the energy to even acknowledge my presence had been drained from him. A soft knock at the door startled me, and I turned to see a man in a white coat stepping inside. His face was kind but serious, his eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored my own. "Mrs. Evelyn?" he asked gently. "I'm Dr. Carter." I nodded, unable to find my voice as my gaze flickered back to Michael. What happened to him?" I managed to ask, though my words came out as little more than a whisper. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Dr. Carter sighed, stepping closer. "Your son has been battling a terminal illness for the past 7 years, he said softly. He didn't want to worry you, so he chose to keep it private. He's been under private care here at the house, surrounded by a team of nurses and doctors. 7 years. The weight of those words crushed me. 7 years of silence, of unanswered calls and unopened letters. 7 years where I had imagined him thriving, too busy with his success to make time for his mother. And all along, he had been here, fighting for his life. Why didn't he tell me?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I would have been here for him. I could have helped." Dr. Carter's expression softened. "He wanted to protect you," he said. "He thought it would be easier for you not to see him this way. But I think he knew you would come eventually. He's been asking for you in his own way, though he hasn't had the strength to say much." Tears streamed down my face as I moved to Michael's bedside, my trembling hands reaching for his. His skin was warm but fragile, his once strong hands now thin and delicate. I held on tightly, as though my grip alone could keep him tethered to this world. "Michael," I said softly, my voice breaking. "It's me, Mom. I'm here now. I'm so sorry I didn't come sooner. I didn't know." His eyelids fluttered slightly, and for a brief moment, his eyes met mine. They were dull with exhaustion, but filled with a flicker of recognition. A tear slipped down his cheek, and I brushed it away gently, my heart aching at the sight of my son reduced to this frail, vulnerable state. Dr. Carter placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "He's comfortable," he said quietly. "But his time is limited. If there's anything you'd like to say to him, now is the time." I nodded, my throat tightening as I turned my full attention back to Michael. "I'm here," I whispered again, pressing his hand to my cheek. I'm not leaving you. The machines continued their quiet hum, their sounds blending with the steady rhythm of his breathing. I leaned in closer, my tears falling freely as I began to speak. I told him everything I had held back for years, the love I had never stopped feeling, the pride I had carried in my heart for the man he had become. I told him about the letters I had written, the calls I had made, the longing I had felt every day since he had gone silent. And then, I reminded him of the happier times, the moments that had defined our bond. Do you remember the time you built that treehouse in the backyard? I said, forcing a smile through my tears. It was crooked and barely held together, but you were so proud of it. You said it was going to be your headquarters for world domination. I chuckled softly, my voice trembling. And do you remember that science fair in middle school? You stayed up all night building that volcano. I thought it was going to explode in the kitchen, but you pulled it off. His lips twitched slightly, a faint ghost of a smile. It was enough to break and heal my heart all at once. I held his hand tightly, my thumb brushing over the back of it as I continued to share stories from his childhood, each one a thread connecting us in the fragile hours we had left. The hours passed in a blur, the room dimming as the evening turned to night. Dr. Carter stepped in occasionally to check on Michael, his presence a quiet reassurance. I didn't leave my son's side, my hand never letting go of his. The fire in my chest, the pain, the love, the regret, kept me rooted there, refusing to let the moment slip away. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I leaned back in the chair beside his bed. My eyes grew heavy, and I fought to stay awake, but the soft rhythm of Michael's breathing lulled me into a fitful sleep. As I drifted off, I held onto his hand, the warmth of his skin grounding me in a moment I knew I would never forget. I didn't know then that it would be the last time I would feel it. When I woke, the first thing I noticed was the cold. The room that had been filled with the soft rhythm of Michael's breathing now felt still, the air heavy and silent. My heart sank as I sat up, my body stiff from the hours spent in the chair beside his bed. The hand I had held so tightly was limp in mine, its warmth gone. Michael? I whispered, though deep down, I already knew. My voice trembled as I leaned closer, my other hand gently brushing his cheek. His face was peaceful, free of the pain and exhaustion that had weighed on him. Tears blurred my vision, spilling down my cheeks as I rested my forehead against his. You're free now, I murmured, my voice breaking. My sweet boy, you're free. Dr. Carter entered the room moments later, his footsteps quiet but deliberate. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, his expression filled with sympathy. He passed peacefully, he said softly. I'm so sorry for your loss. I nodded, unable to speak as I held on to Michael's hand, unwilling to let go just yet. The world outside the room seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of us, mother and son, in a moment suspended between grief and love. I stayed with him for a while longer, whispering words of comfort and farewell. I told him how much I loved him, how proud I was of the life he had lived. I thanked him for being my son, for the joy and purpose he had brought into my life. And as I sat there, I felt a strange sense of peace begin to settle over me. He wasn't in pain anymore. He wasn't fighting. He had found rest, and though my heart ached with the weight of losing him, I was grateful for the time we had shared, those final hours of connection that had been a gift in the midst of so much sorrow. Dr. Carter returned after some time, gently reminding me that arrangements needed to be made. I nodded, my movements slow and deliberate as I stood. My legs felt weak, my body heavy, but I forced myself to let go of Michael's hand. I'll leave you to say goodbye in your own way, Dr. Carter said, his voice soft and kind. If you need anything, just let us know. Thank you, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. As I stepped out of the room, the reality of his absence began to sink in. The house, which had felt so still and lifeless before, now seemed even emptier. The grand halls and pristine rooms that had once been his world felt hollow, their beauty diminished by the loss of the person who had lived within them. I found myself standing at the top of the grand staircase, my hand resting on the banister. Below, the staff moved quietly, their expressions somber as they went about their tasks. They had known, I realized. They had cared for him in ways I never had the chance to, and for that, I was grateful. As I descended the staircase, memories of Michael filled my mind, his laughter, his determination, the way he had always chased his dreams with unwavering focus. I thought about the boy who had once clung to my hand as we walked to school, who had confided his hopes and fears to me late at night. That boy had grown into a man I barely recognized, but in his final moments, he had been my son again. By the time I reached the front door, the butler was waiting for me, my coat and bag in hand. His usual stoicism had softened, and he offered me a small, understanding nod. "Mrs. Evelyn," he said quietly, "if there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you," I said, my voice trembling as I took the coat. "You all took such good care of him. I'll always be grateful for that." The drive home was long and quiet, the rain pattering softly against the windshield. The roads were slick and glistening, reflecting the dim glow of street lights. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, my mind replaying the events of the day. The grief was overwhelming, but beneath it was a sense of gratitude, a bittersweet acknowledgement of the love and connection we had shared in his final hours. As I pulled into the driveway of my small cottage, the rain eased, and the world seemed to hold its breath. I sat in the car for a moment, the weight of the day pressing down on me. Finally, I stepped out into the cool night air, my tears mingling with the light drizzle that lingered. Inside the house, everything was as I had left it. The stack of letters still sat on the desk, a quiet reminder of the years of silence that had stretched between us. But now, those letters felt different. They were no longer unanswered pleas, they were expressions of love that had endured, even across distance and time. I sat down at the desk, pulling out a fresh sheet of paper. The words came slowly at first, but then they flowed, each one a tribute to the son I had loved so deeply. "Dear Michael," I wrote, my tears smudging the ink. "I'll miss you every day, but I will carry you with me in everything I do. Thank you for letting me be your mother. I hope I made you proud." As I finished the letter, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The pain of losing him would never fully fade, but neither would the love. And that, I realized, was the most important thing of all. The days after Michael's passing moved with a quiet heaviness, the kind that settled deep into my bones. The house was too still, the echoes of my own footsteps a constant reminder of what I had lost. Grief was not new to me, it had visited in waves throughout my life, but this time it was different. This grief carried a sharp edge of regret, the weight of years lost in silence. Each morning, I found myself at my small desk, staring at the stack of letters I had written to him over the years. For so long, they had been my only connection to him, my words reaching out into the void with the faint hope that he might hear me. Now, they felt like artifacts from another life, a life where I had still believed in endless possibilities, in the chance for reconciliation. I picked up one of the letters, running my fingers over the envelope. It was dated 3 years ago, written on a quiet spring evening. I unfolded it carefully and began to read. "Dear Michael," it began. "I saw the cherry blossoms in the park today and thought of you. Do you remember how you used to climb the trees in our yard, trying to get the best view? You were fearless back then. I hope you still are." Tears blurred the words as I read on, my heart aching for the boy who had grown into a man I barely knew. But as the sorrow washed over me, so did a sense of clarity. Those letters, though never sent, were a testament to the love that had endured. They were a part of Michael's story, and mine. I knew then that I couldn't let his memory fade into the silence of the past. I needed to honor him, to find a way to ensure that his life, and the lessons I had learned from it, would leave a mark on the world. That afternoon, I returned to the garden. It had been neglected during the cold winter months, the flower beds barren and the hydrangeas reduced to brittle stalks. I knelt in the dirt, my hands trembling as I began to clear away the dead leaves and debris. The physical work was grounding, the rhythm of it giving me a sense of purpose. As I worked, I thought about the conversations Michael and I had shared in his final hours. I had spoken of the past, of his childhood and the joy he had brought into my life. But what struck me most was the look in his eyes, tired but grateful, as though my presence had been a gift he hadn't dared to hope for. That memory became my anchor, a reminder that even in the face of loss, there was still meaning to be found. In the weeks that followed, I began to take small steps toward creating something lasting in Michael's name. I reached out to Dr. Carter, thanking him for the care and compassion he had shown my son. Through our conversations, an idea began to take shape, a scholarship fund for young medical students, aimed at fostering the kind of kindness and dedication that had made such a difference in Michael's final years. The fund grew quickly, supported by donations from those who had known Michael in his professional life. I was touched by the stories they shared, of his generosity, his vision, and his quiet determination to make a difference. It was a side of him I hadn't fully understood, and hearing it brought me closer to him, even in his absence. On the day the scholarship fund was officially launched, I visited Michael's grave for the first time. It was a simple headstone, nestled beneath the shade of an old oak tree. I placed a bouquet of hydrangeas at its base, the blooms vibrant against the gray stone. "I hope you'd be proud of this," I said softly, my voice carried by the gentle breeze. "It's not enough, not for all that you gave. But it's something. It's a way to keep your spirit alive." I stood there for a long time, letting the quiet of the cemetery seep into me. There was pain, yes, but also a sense of peace. I had found a way to carry Michael with me, to honor the love that had never wavered. As the months turned to years, the scholarship fund flourished, touching countless lives. I received letters from recipients who spoke of their dreams and the difference the fund had made for them. Each letter felt like a conversation with Michael, a continuation of the bond we had shared. At home, I continued to tend the garden, its flowers a reminder of the resilience of life. The hydrangeas bloomed brighter each year, their colors vivid and full of hope. On quiet evenings, I would sit among them with a cup of tea, my thoughts drifting to Michael and the memories we had created. In those moments, I felt his presence, not as a ghost, but as a part of me that would never fade. He was in the wind that rustled the leaves, in the sunlight that warmed my skin, in the laughter of children playing in the distance. And though the ache of missing him remained, it was tempered by the knowledge that our love had endured, even across the chasm of loss. As I sat in the garden one evening, the sky painted with the soft hues of sunset, I picked up my pen and began to write once more. This time, it wasn't a letter to Michael, it was a story, our story. A story of love, regret, reconciliation, and the quiet strength of a mother's heart. "Dear Michael," I wrote, the words flowing easily now. "This is for you. And it's for me. It's for all the moments we missed and all the love we shared. It's for the world to know who you were, and who you'll always be." And as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, I smiled through my tears, knowing that his legacy would live on, not just in the lives he had touched, but in the heart of a mother who would carry him with her, always. If you've enjoyed my story, please leave your comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, where your support means the world to me. I look forward to bringing you more stories that inspires growth, joy, and purpose. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.